Okay, first question, and these are from the audience. So, if you're running as a constitutional sheriff, who determines the constitutionality of various laws, you or a court? Rick?
At the end of the day, the courts do. However, there are some plain language violations that we see going on, whether it be property rights or due process rights. Let's take Sackett versus EPA here recently, where the big issue is the EPA said, oh, we're going to find that you can't do anything, but until we actually levy the fine, you don't have any right to even take us to court. So at the end of the day, the courts do have the final say. However, I believe it's inherent on each and every one of us to consider whether what we're doing meets with the Constitution.
Thank you. Wayne?
Well, as I state on my brochure, my job as Lake Tahoe County Sheriff is to enforce the law, not to interpret it. The Constitution and the constitutionality of laws is the bailiwick of the court. And I think that candidate Henderson here just supported that by what he just said, which is that the court was ultimately the ones who decided whether or not these people could use their property that they had been banned from using. And ultimately, the court said yes. I believe that the court is going to make a decision on Obamacare in the next couple of months, and I think it's going to be the courts that decide that it's unconstitutional, which I expect to see happen. So clearly, it's up to the court to make a decision as to whether something is constitutional or not. Let's don't mistake the Constitution for illegal actions. Criminals can always be arrested. That has nothing to do with the Constitution.
Thank you. Richie?
I can't say much more than that. I believe it's the courts. And Wayne's right about that. And we can only enforce the laws of the sheriff that are made.
Thank you. Next question, again from the audience. What are your views on a reserve program? Wayne?
Well, I love the reserve program. I love the concept of it. We are faced, however, with some actual realities, and that's this. We see that most people that want to become reserves in law enforcement ultimately want to get into law enforcement. It is an extremely expensive training process. The equipment costs a lot of money. Vests, guns, the whole 9 yards, the uniforms, the leather gear, everything can run $2,000. Once you've made that investment and that person decides that they want to get into law enforcement, now after all that effort and time that you've spent, money, you don't have reserves anymore. I'd rather rely on something like the Citizens Emergency Response Team, which the Community Incident Response Team, which provides us with reserves and limited powers that really help us well.
Thank you. Richie?
I believe in the reserve program. That's how I got started. It's hard to find people that want to be in a reserve program that stay very long. And it does cost a lot of money to train a reserve, and there's a lot of liability and responsibility with it. But I do believe in a reserve program. If you don't use a reserve program, though, you do have other things, resources like sheriff's posses and things like that you can utilize. Search and rescue, things like that. There's a lot of good programs out there that we can use if you don't have the Sheriff's Reserve Program. But I do like the Sheriff's Reserve Program.
Thank you. Rick?
I also agree with the reserve program. That's how I got my start. I agree with everything Richie said. However, I would add that one of the purposes of a reserve program is to get some people that want to be involved, and it helps them decide if they actually want to stay in law enforcement. Would help with some of the retentions, maybe not even locally, but at the same time, during the time that they are here, it allows them to go help out at the fair rather than pay people. It helps get people out so that we can partner up some of the people. Yes, there are liabilities and expenses. However, I believe that the benefit definitely outweighs the cost under most circumstances.
Thank you. Another question from the audience. What was your last employer before your current one, and why did you leave? Richie?
My last employer where I actually received a paycheck would have been Latah County Sheriff's Office. And I essentially left because I openly campaigned for somebody else in '08 that did not win. And so I just moved on, and I've been self-employed since.
Thank you. Rick?
My last employer was the University of Idaho. I worked as a teaching assistant while I was working on my graduate degree. I left specifically because I was just about finished and was planning on running for sheriff, and decided that as all I had left was the writing, and I will continue that and defend it. So,
Thank you. Wayne?
Richie, you're an honest man. My last employer before I came here was Mojave County Sheriff's Office in Kingman, Arizona. The main reason we left, there were multi-reasons, but the biggest reason probably, my wife left a good job at the county health department to go take a job as a waitress in a restaurant at night so that she could homeschool our two daughters, because the junior high there was so dangerous that we responded daily there to shootings and knifings and drug usage and all sorts of things of that nature, and we wanted to get to a much safer environment.